Mark Ibañez, what a pleasure to see you. I know you've been around, and you were around for so many years on our screens on a nightly basis, but you signed off, what, 2 years ago?
Can you believe that? I mean, it'll be 2 years, March 31st of 24. I mean, like who's counting, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
it has been flying by, unfortunately, because I'm enjoying the heck out of it. But 42 plus years at Channel 2.
Yeah.
So it's a long ride, man.
What an amazing run. So, what do you do after all those years working in the business at one place, and then you haven't been? How do you fill your time? How do you keep yourself busy? What have you been up to?
Well, I always crack up when I hear people come up to me and they go, "Are you bored yet?" and and I'm like, "No, I am not bored at all." I have never been one of those guys. In fact, that's like a pet peeve of mine. Adults should never be bored. All right,
Yeah.
read a book, you know. But I keep plenty busy. And I heard a funny line the other day. I was actually having a little adult beverage with Joe Fonzie, the great Joe
Oh,
Fonzie
yeah.
in Danville.
Yeah.
And we ran into this retired police officer. And I said, "Well, do you miss it?" And he goes, "You know what? I don't miss the circus, but I miss a few of the clowns." and,
Hang on, I'm
and
I'm writing I'm writing that one down to put in my
yeah,
book eventually. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah. And I thought that was apropos for me too. I really miss the guys like the other night, the Niner game. Ordinarily we would have all been watching our big screen TVs in the sports department and
Yeah.
screaming and yelling and ordering a couple of pizzas. And I miss that camaraderie and all of that. But you ask what I've been doing. I mean, first of all, I've got three grandsons that all live in Alamo, and so I'm over there. I live up in Napa. I'm over there all the time, and in fact, Dennis Eckersley and I have made a promise to get together because he's got grandkids in Alamo too. So we're going to get together and talk some baseball. But I'm also I do a little radio gigs, Brody,
Yeah.
on the Napa station on Friday mornings, like a half hour kind of free form. The disc jockey asks me my opinions about stuff, and of course, you can be a lot more forthright in radio and then you could on television, and the time allotment is wide open. And then I do one in Santa Rosa on Mondays, and it keeps kind of my little toe in the water in broadcasting. I have fun with that. And then I'm working as a so-called consultant
Yeah.
with a sports-based technology company in the city called Game On Technology, which is all about AI helping sports teams promote their product and have more interconnectivity with fans. So, like I say, I'm never bored, man. I'm always keeping busy, and not to mention working out and all that stuff. So it's
So would
great.
would you consider a YouTube channel?
Sure. I would definitely consider that. And it's funny, Brody. My wife, when I retired, she said, because she is not into sports at all, and I
Okay.
actually think it's been one of the saviors of our marriage too, because she, I get to come home and she
Right.
wasn't, upset by the game or whatever, and so I said, nah, I'm not going to watch it as much. It'll be more casually. And I'm going to make you this promise, honey. No more Wednesday night football. That's out. I promise you, no Wednesday night football. That could be our date night. She's like, "Really? You'll do that for me?" And so that gives you an idea of the level of how into sports she is.
Tricky, very
So,
tricky. Uh,
yeah, her brother-in-law busted me out, so I'm in the doghouse
hey,
currently. Anyway,
you
so
never know. In a couple years, there might be Wednesday night football with the NFL. They'll
wouldn't put it
find
past
a
them.
way. They'll find a way.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
asking you about the YouTube thing. I'm kind of kidding, but I'm also serious. As I look at the sports media business from when you got into it versus how things are today, I mean, it just seems drastically like day and night. What do you see as the
Whew.
biggest changes? Is there anything that's similar?
Well, I'll tell you what, one of the saddest things to me, and you probably noticed this too, even in your journey in broadcasting, is the inability nowadays to create and have relationships with the players.
Yeah.
When I first started working, Brody, you could walk up to Joe Montana and go, hey Joe, you got a couple of seconds, you know?
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, that's one of the moments I definitely remember. Redwood City, they're training down there before the Santa Clara days. I walk up to Joe Montana, who was a rookie, and I said, hey, Joe, you got a couple of minutes to do an interview? And he kind of looked at me quizzically and he goes, no, what do you want to interview me for? And he points to Steve DeBerg and he says, he's the number one quarterback. I'm just the backup. And I was like, I don't think you're going to be the backup for long. But my point being, like I have breakfast a couple times, 2-3 times a year with Ronnie Lott, with Chris Mullen, with, you know, guys that you interviewed and you created a relationship with. I never met, at the end of my career, the last 5 years, never met Jimmy G, you know, personally.
Yeah.
Never met a lot of these guys. And the bonds is the one thing. You know, they all do those press conferences now after the game. You can't just walk up to a guy as easily now. And obviously, that's more of the broadcaster change. But as far as the business goes, I mean, there's just so much more money on the line. It's sounds almost trite and cliche to say it now, but it has changed everything. And the players, when I first started in 78 at CBS in Sacramento and then 79 at Channel 2, they wanted to do interviews with you for the most part because, like, hey, maybe somebody will see me and offer me a shaving commercial, or I'll get a speaking engagement for a couple $100. Now it's like, whatever, man, you're just a pain. And by the way, I have my own podcast and my own channel. So,
I don't need you. Exactly.
Yeah, basically. So that's, you know, the revenue that's generated now, the relationships with players, and the players' complete unneediness of your services.
Yeah, it's true.
You know? And I'm sure you've seen a change even in the time you've been around.
I think you're right about the relationships. They're different. I've had athletes who I hadn't yet met, and I'm introducing myself to an A's player or a Sharks player. They've just come up or they've been traded in for the first time, whatever. And the reason I know they know me is because they'll say, oh, I saw your tweet, or I follow you on Instagram, or I watch your YouTube channel. So it's kind of weird that the connections, just like a lot of life connections these days, they're virtual. Like and there's a lot of text messaging. I'll tell you that, you know, what maybe doesn't happen with me and an athlete in person, a lot of times happens via a text. You meet a lot of people, you exchange phone numbers over time, or you message people, whatever. And there is a lot of that, but I don't know if that's better than the old way of face-to-face accountability and personal relationships.
When I started, exactly, the actual face-to-face. And you know, the other thing that's huge as well, obviously, is when I started at Channel 2, it was basically Channel 2, 4, 5, 7 in KQED.
Yeah, and that was it.
Everybody. And you knew the players watched you. Like if you said something they didn't like.
Exactly.
There was accountability because I would interview players in the latter stages of my career at Channel 2, and I knew they didn't know me from Adam. It was this guy, whatever. But back in the day, you'd get players that like would motion to you, like, come here, I want to have a word with you about something you said last night. Because they had no other access to the highlight. Of course, they play a day game. They're going to be watching the 10 o'clock games,
of course.
You know?
Well, they were only tuning in for Dennis Richmond. Let's be honest, but who wasn't?
Be true about that. Who wasn't?
But that's the thing, and I have subscribed to that, Mark. I'm glad you mentioned it because in anything I do on social media, I always pretend like I'm talking as if that person is in the room. I don't want to say anything because I think a lot of media types these days feel like, well, if I put it on a podcast or if I put it on social media, so what? It doesn't matter. It's not real. But to your point. And just like they used to watch you, they also scroll through the timeline. They're checking what you said about them. And I would never say anything on social or here on YouTube that I wouldn't say to an athlete, like in person with their family watching. I just think that's a good golden rule. So.
Yeah, it's accountability and it's self-governing in a lot of ways. And I think you'll appreciate this because you've been around the A's so much. But I had one of my biggest learning moments from Lon Simmons,
Oh yeah.
who was doing the A's games at the point where we met. And I had said something on Channel 2 about what a homer Monty Moore was. Back in the day, one of the early, for you youngsters, one of the early A's broadcasters. He would usually, he would typically go, good guys 4, bad guys 2. I mean, that's how much of an A's homer he was. But he was really a magnanimous guy and a real treasure in broadcasting, but you kind of had to get to know him. Anyway, I'm at batting practice one day before an A's game, and I tap on the shoulder from Lon, and it was big, intimidating guy, and he pulls me aside and he goes, "Hey, Mark, I watched you last night and I heard what you said about Monty Moore." And he said, "I'm sure Monty worked every bit as hard as you have to get where you are. And he's a professional, and his job is hard enough. And dealing with the fans and people that write in without having one of his peers and contemporaries badmouth him on the air. I'm sure you would feel particularly bad if a fellow broadcaster got on there and said, that Ibañez guy, blah, blah, blah." He said, "Just think about it." And Lon did it with such class.
Yeah.
And it was like a fatherly thing. He wasn't going, "You said this, blah, blah, blah." It was just almost like, you can take my advice or not.
Yeah.
If that's the kind of guy you want to be. And it stuck with me forever. And one of my, credos for the rest of my career was, I never played big league baseball. I didn't play in the NHL or the NBA, NFL. And so my critiquing could only go so far. You can only know so much as a non-participant.
Right.
And so I always kept that in mind. And, here's what I observe after watching baseball for 40 years. But I can't go that extra dig and go, but his slider was, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Because I don't know what it's like to throw a 2-2 slider with the bases loaded at the bottom of the 9th inning. You can't do that. And I think that's why I was able to, number one, last 40 plus years, and 2, have, the respect of a lot of guys, that you see down the line and they come up and they want to talk to you. And that's what's been particularly satisfying for me.
A couple years ago, I got an email out of nowhere from Monty Moore, who was watching A's broadcasts. And I won't repeat everything he said, but it was just so complimentary, short, sweet, right to the point. And I'll tell you what, that quick email from who he was and what he did as a broadcaster, that means more to me than any other recognition, award, or whatever. It's so, and you're right. Yeah. It's a community of broadcasters, and it's so cool to have, somebody else pass along advice to you. And that's kind of what I want to lead to here. I mean, I grew up in the days of Mark Ibañez and Gary Radnich and Wayne Walker, and I don't know, like, on one hand, it's cool that now you can get instant news and it's right on your phone and everything's so accessible. But I kind of miss maybe the golden age of television, sports television specifically. And I know you're probably slanted in saying you miss it too, but there was something special about that definitely just does not exist today.
No question. And it was really cool to know that if there was an afternoon Giants game or something like that, you knew everybody couldn't just put up their phone and watch the highlights. You were the first person showing them
exactly
if they couldn't have attended. And you know what's the coolest thing? I have people walk by me, obviously people closer to my age, but they'll walk by me like in the city, and it makes me feel, they'll go, 10:52 Monday through Friday. They knew the time, like everybody knew 10:52
when the sports started.
And that's when they would flip it over. And they've told me like how that was like in their, like people have said in their families, like, oh, got to switch it over to Ibañez, 10:52 or whatever. And those were cool because what it did, it was like a community spirit. It was, community, to feel like everybody was kind of watching the same thing. And I heard one of the broadcasters after the 49er game the other day said something that resonated with me. It's like, because I saw it happen after the 49ers in 81 and then the actual Super Bowl in 82, it bonds a community. and there's kind of like a, see a guy with a nine, hey Niners, well, great game, like, and it gives you a commonality, and that is what I don't think people are realizing. I know you do, and I know
Yeah.
people close to it don't realize what losing, for instance, the Oakland A's does to a city like Oakland. It's something to be proud of. It's a morale boost. It's self-esteem to the city. We're a big league town. A's are doing great, man. A's, man, you going to the game tonight? All that is somewhere lost in it, and it is sad. And I don't want to sound like the old guy talking about the good old days, but there's definitely something to be said for the community morale and togetherness that sports brings.
Let me ask you one more good old days question, and then I actually want to move forward to every.
I'm good at those.
Every Bay Area team. I want to get to their current state because I want to get your takes on where they're all at. So my last good old days question is, I guess you were there for the catch. I heard you were also there for the play. And these words, by the way, these terms, if you don't know what they are, you're too young and you need to do some research. Also, were you at Candlestick for Game 3 of the '89 World Series?
I was not, and those two things that you mentioned are definitely, even after 40 years, those were two of the highlights. I was probably at the most 20 yards away from Dwight in the end zone when he made that catch, and I was up in the press box for the play. And just a quick story, back in those days, that game was not actually televised on a network, that big game. And we all the stations, 4, 5, 7, 2, we all had our cameramen there in the press box lined up with their tripods shooting the game. And that play happens. And my cameraman, and I'm jumping, I'm like freaking out. This is the all-time play. And I look over at my cameraman to make sure he's got it.
Oh no.
And he's like this. He's leaned back against the back wall. And he's like, it's gonna get called back. I'm not shooting that. And long story short.
You borrow the footage from somebody?
But that was not an accepted thing. I borrowed it from a Channel 5 cameraman who was a buddy of mine from Sacramento. We worked together. And let me just tell you, he is the video that we all see.
Okay.
He shot that video. And he was one of the top photographers for 60 Minutes. He's traveled the globe. He's covered some of the biggest stories in history since then. My cameraman is no longer in the business. He will go unnamed, and he wasn't in the business more than like a year or two after that. So,
who knew that was coming? But I guess to your point, if everybody else was rolling on it and you weren't, that's rough.
What can it hurt?
That's
just
rough.
Roll on. If it's no good, it's no good.
Was there? I was just going to ask, of all the moments, right? Whether it was the play or the catch or the '89 World Series, is there one that's still like tangible to you that feels like it was just yesterday?
Yes, and just being a lifelong Giant fan, for some reason, even with the catch and the play, the Travis Ishikawa 3-run homer walk-off, bottom, I think it was the bottom of the ninth.
Yeah,
I was there, and AT&T or whatever it was called at that year was literally shaking. Like there was and I remember jumping up and like objectivity be damned. I'm a Giants fan. I'm screaming, and just the pandemonium, because it kind of brought you as a longtime Giant fan back to that, Russ Hodges call of 51 of, Giants win the pennant.
Yeah.
The Giants win the pennant, and that to me, that was just so electric, to be a Giant fan and in that stadium at that point. Totally electric. But you asked me about this real quick on the '89 World Series.
Yeah.
My duties that night were only to do post-game interviews. That's all I had to do was watch the game, take notes, go down to the A's and Giants clubhouses and do the post-game interviews, and then a live hit from the field after the game. So I'm like, well, you know what? It's a 5:30 start or whatever. Right. I'm going to miss all that Bay Area traffic. And I was living in Walnut Creek at the time. I'm going to hang out till about the second or third inning,
and then go.
watch the game, listen to it, and then go. So, so it was. I'm going to go way inside baseball here. My girlfriend at the time, we got in an argument because she didn't want to miss the first pitch, and so we were late. We were arguing about that in the driveway in Walnut Creek. And I remember saying, man, if this isn't the epicenter, if the city is the epicenter, this is the big one, because it was rolling big time all the way out in Walnut Creek. So never made it to the game, but on the way, we said we better get into Channel 2 at Jack London Square and help out with the news,
right?
And I'll never forget Ron Fairley, the play-by-play guy, going, "This game, I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be delayed at least 15 or 20 minutes." They were hoping to actually play. Little did we know,
10 days, I think. Yeah.
Wow, crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah, I was much younger. I was also in the East Bay, 5:04 p.m. I'll never forget it. Let's zip through the current state of all the Bay Area teams, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And I think we got to start with the 49ers, right? Headed back to the Super Bowl, and it'd be the first time in a long time if they actually won it this time. 95, like, you were very entrenched with the team back then. I kind of like the adversity that they faced in these two playoff games this season. Nothing was guaranteed against Green Bay, and certainly against the Lions. That was one heck of a comeback.
Yeah, my heart rate is just getting back to normal. I think I've told you, my wife's not into sports at all.
Yeah.
So she's kind of looking at me like I'm kind of some kind of experimental. She's like, "What is wrong with you?" Because I have a regiment, Brody. I pace around the kitchen island, and I time it so I'm just looking at the play, and then I can't handle it. And then during the commercial breaks, I do push-ups to let off anxiety. And she's just like, "You."
I don't do that, by the way. Yeah, that's great.
But you know what? I tell folks that, I'm happy that number one, I got to cover all the teams I loved as a little kid, and I still have that. Sometimes I wish I wasn't as fervent and passionate about it, because it would be a lot easier on my gut, but I can't help it. And I think you're right. I think that the circumstances of the first two playoff games will serve them well, because they've been through the grinder, man. They know they can come back. They also know that the importance of getting off to a much better start.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to have 2 weeks now to kind of correct some things. Obviously, they've got to shore things up with regard to the running, stopping the run, and all those things. But I think the rematch, I like it. I think they have a good shot at taking Kansas City down, which would be nice. But I think they're set up because of Brock Purdy's contract being so low. They can keep loading up. I mean, this is a team whose window is, I think, this year and at least two more.
And that's a good point. I mean, I was going to bring up the balance of attention. Everybody focuses on Brock Purdy. It's a tremendous story, the last draft pick, and to turn into a Super Bowl quarterback. But I also don't want to take away from, to your point, like the rest of this team and the way it's built.
Yeah.
And Purdy gets so much attention, and I can't even believe this criticism. And I'm not ready to put him in the Steve Young or Joe Montana category yet.
I'm creeping up there.
Are you really? Where do you put him?
Yeah. Well, somebody said he does things that are, and I like this phrase, Montana-esque.
Oh, yeah.
The way, and one of the things that I remember Bill Walsh saying was the most important thing in a quarterback was not necessarily their arm and their height and their strength and all that kind of thing. It's like an intangible that's a feel for the game, a feel of knowing without eyes in the back of your head where that rush is. And the other thing he used to say is he loved Joe Montana's feet.
Yeah.
To be nimble enough in the pocket. And I think that's a similarity that Brock has. Those two runs that he pulled off in the second half of this game were just like, you either get that or you don't. You can't teach that. And cerebrally, I think that's what's helping to separate him and make up for, whatever they keep saying, lack of arm strength and those kinds of things. It's a great story, but the rest of the team, I mean, how can you not love, Kittle and Bosa and, just everything about this team.
Yeah.
They're just like, they just feel united and no knuckleheads allowed. You're either in it to win it or you're out,
It just seems like a fun team, quite honestly. It seems like a 49ers team that you covered a lot back in the day, that there's so many likable players. Let me go to the Warriors now, and obviously we have enjoyed their success around here for more than a decade, sustained, and the big three have been a huge part of that. But I also think we need to come to the realization that we're probably approaching the end, the final couple chapters of something special. I know nothing lasts forever, but do you think it's even possible that they can somehow reboot successfully and sustain where they've been?
I do. There's a Jackson Brown song that I love called "All Good Things Must Come to an End," and I think that's kind of where we're at. And, some people are embracing it. Some people are in denial.
Yeah.
And I just don't think, as currently constructed, this team can get deep into the playoffs. And, I think it's been well documented. A couple guys are really underperforming. Andrew Wiggins stands out. But then, you do have positive stories. Jonathan Kuminga, we're seeing a star develop right in front of our eyes. We're seeing Clay diminished, certainly defensively, and he's streaky. Steph's a miracle. That game Saturday night, I don't know if you saw that last week against the Lakers, man. That was just watching, two mammoth stars,
icons,
in a sport.
Absolutely,
Yeah, that's incredible. But, depending on, I don't want to jump the gun and say no chance to get in the playoffs this year, but I want to see what they do, if anything, at the trade deadline. And we do need to kind of embrace what we lived through, how great it was, and just cherish every minute you're seeing Steph Curry on the court. And, I just Draymond Green is like a constant consternation, I'll say. And sometimes I dislike him. Sometimes, like Saturday, you see how great he is and what he can bring. And if he can just get his emotions together, I think, who knows? They could raise a ruckus in the postseason. Hopefully they get there.
Yeah, I agree with you. They always seem to know how to turn it on. And obviously any team that has Steph Curry always has that advantage. Let me make this statement and tell me if you agree or if I'm crazy. Steph Curry is even on a higher level than a Joe Montana or a Jerry Rice or a Barry Bonds to his sport.
I would say right equal with them.
Okay.
I mean, certainly it's hard to say someone is above, what Joe, because I lived through the heart of what.
I agree. I mean, he's like the standard, right? And I guess that's kind of the hard point to even put like a Steph Curry in the same class or category as like Joe Montana but
I think he deserves that.
I agree.
I think the Bay Area has embraced him in that way. And what's maybe even more important, the joy that Steph has brought on the court. He has brought in humility and in giving. The guy gives to the community and children in so many ways. Not everybody has that in them, and he does, and he and his wife do it very naturally. They don't want a pat on the back. They just it's in their hearts, and I think that's put him there. And you mentioned Barry Bonds, and I doubt he'd ever admit it, but I bet if Barry went back and thought about how he acted toward the media, how he treated a lot of the fans and that kind of thing. Hopefully he's grown and learned from that, and he probably wishes he would have done things differently. And I know you went through college, and we always used to get hammered objectivity, and then you become a professional and you realize there's a lot of subjectivity.
Right.
And, people are going, and Barry mistreated a lot of people. And it's my contention that's 80% of why he's not in the Hall of Fame. If he'd been a super nice guy and treated people with respect that they deserved, it might be a different story for Barry.
I'm taking a look at the clock, so I want to narrow it down to just one more topic here. A couple questions on the A's and this situation.
This has been a blast, by the way.
This could go on for hours. I actually have to kind of stop myself.
Yeah.
Did you ever think in all your years of covering Bay Area sports that someday, and I know you remember when the A's arrived to Oakland in the Bay Area, did you ever think that we'd be here on the doorstep of maybe their departure like this?
No, I really didn't. And I felt the same way when there were chances that the Giants would actually leave. Just intuitively, I felt like they're not going. This cannot happen. Maybe I was just in some kind of weird denial and just being naive.
Is that how you felt back then in 1992? Did you really feel like you were not seeing it clearly?
Yeah, I felt like they're not going. I just felt like we cannot let a treasure like the Giants leave the Bay Area, and some very significant people stepped up and got it done. And that was part of the problem with the A's. Nobody was able to step up and go, no, this can't. A lot of people wanted to step in and maybe didn't have the wherewithal to do it. And I think it's sad because I've told you today that, a city is so buoyed by having a professional franchise and a professional team. And it's so good for morale and the self-esteem of an area. And I just really, really hope that I'm going to go ahead and say this. I really hope that deal in Las Vegas falls flat and bursts at the seams.
Well, it's just not complete yet. And I think, you know what, the other part about this is the process. It's gone on for so long. And even the Raiders process took some time. A lot of people have asked me, well, is this the same feeling of when the Raiders moved? And I can't really describe it, but I feel like it's, for whatever reason, it's totally different. And again,
I agree.
No two situations are identical, but I don't really know why this one feels different. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that Las Vegas was a viable move for the Raiders. It kind of made sense, like, glitzy, and you're going to have the tourists coming in. I think the Raiders have been, from what I hear, successful in Las Vegas. And obviously the Golden Knights were successful because they were the fresh friend. They were for real new. They weren't moving in from somewhere.
Right.
But the A's, as you well know from covering baseball, Brody, baseball's a very particular, it's like a love affair of fandom. Fans like to fall in love with players and the whole history of baseball. And I think if you just dump a baseball team into a city where I haven't ever heard anybody describe Las Vegas as a baseball town, and I just don't think it's going to have that instantaneous success that the Raiders and the Golden Knights had there. And it feels different. It feels like it's a lot more precarious. I don't see a lot of, fandom, people like just breaking down barriers to try and get the A's to go there. And I just think it's really sad for Oakland that we didn't have some kind of, I'm not pointing a finger at anybody, but we needed like a deal maker to happen, to make it happen behind the scenes. Like for instance, Willie Brown. I've talked to people who say that park the Giants have might not have happened. Whatever you think of Willie Brown, he made sure the people that needed to be talked to, like, remember they didn't want to move this homeless facility there, would disrupt that. He took care of things. He made it happen. And that's what Oakland was missing. And I think Libby Schaaf in over her head a little bit, didn't have the resources to really realize the seriousness of this. And, it's just a whole convoluted mess of mistakes that happen on both sides. I'm not going to put it all on Fisher, but the city has to be responsible too. But bottom line is it's extremely sad. And believe it or not, I still have hope, and I still have in the other room, Brody, here, I got my green T-shirt that says "Sell." And I'm proud of it,
Well, let me in with one final question. And obviously, like we've been talking about here, this is an ever-evolving situation. We're paying attention to what's happening, what hasn't happened, what people expect to happen. I just don't think that people yet have fully realized, even people who are not A's fans in the Bay Area, people who are just baseball fans and they just like to go to the Coliseum once in a while because it's easy. I don't know that our entire region has actually had it sink in yet of what this departure might be like if, in fact, it actually happens. And I mean, like everybody talks about the Cleveland Browns situation when they moved away and how it really, and they got a team almost instantly back. But it
Right.
rips something out of your soul if something like this actually happens.
Yeah, it's in the fiber of the community. And I totally agree with you in that people aren't even going to really realize how bad this is until it actually happens. Driving by that Coliseum, knowing that there's not going to be anything going on in there. And I think that, as I said, it means so much to the fabric of a community to have a team. And I think I'm in some kind of weird denial. Like, I don't totally accept that they're moving. I still have hope for that last second hero to step up. Somehow we're going to wake up and see the paper or your ex, and it'll say Joe Lacob steps in and makes undeniable offer to buy the A's, and that's what I'd love to see happen. Really.
Well, Mark, this has been a pleasure. It's been too long since
Thank you, Brody.
I've talked to you or even just seen you. I consider this almost face to face. But hey, when you're out
Close enough.
when you're out here in the East Bay hanging out with Eck, you can give me a call right afterwards. I'll come find you.
Okay, okay, man, that would be great, Brody. And this has been my pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'll stroll down memory lane with you anytime, man. Appreciate you a lot.